They thought he was just another guy they could push around, but what these cops didn't know was that their victim was actually an undercover FBI agent, and what happened next would leave the whole department shaken. The sun had just slipped below the horizon, leaving the small town bathed in a deep orange glow that slowly faded into night. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across empty sidewalks. It was the kind of quiet evening where nothing much seemed to happen, the kind of night where any unusual sight stood out immediately. Down a narrow two-lane road, a sleek black car rolled along at a steady pace. The driver, a man in his mid-30s, wore a calm expression as he glanced occasionally at his rearview mirror. His face was unreadable, neither nervous nor hurried, almost as if he had all the time in the world. To anyone watching, he appeared like an ordinary traveler passing through town, someone who didn't belong but wasn't in a rush either. Then suddenly the silence of the night was broken by flashing red and blue lights. A siren wailed briefly before cutting off, and a patrol car slid in behind him. The black car slowed and pulled to the side of the road without resistance. Inside, the driver sighed softly, not in fear, but in the kind of patience one uses when dealing with something inevitable. He placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The two officers who stepped out of the patrol car carried themselves with swagger. Their boots hit the pavement heavily as they approached, one on each side of the stopped vehicle. Their eyes narrowed as they sized up the driver. He didn't look dangerous, but that only seemed to make them more suspicious. The taller cop tapped the glass with his flashlight, the beam glaring into the man's face. "License and registration," he demanded sharply, his tone carrying more arrogance than authority. The driver nodded politely and reached into his glove compartment, moving with calm, deliberate motions. He handed over the documents without a word. The shorter cop leaned down toward the window, smirking. "You know why we pulled you over?" he asked, but it didn't sound like a real question. It sounded like bait. The driver tilted his head slightly and replied in a steady voice, "No, officer." "Why is that?" The taller cop grinned in a way that made it clear he enjoyed this moment of power. "You were driving suspiciously. People like you shouldn't be cruising around here at night. This is a small town. Outsiders don't go unnoticed." The driver met his gaze, unflinching. "Suspiciously? I was going 35 in a 35 zone." His calm response seemed to irritate them. The shorter cop chuckled, shaking his head. "Smart mouth, huh? Let's step out of the car. We'll see what you're hiding." The man didn't argue. Without hesitation, he unlocked the door, stepped out, and stood tall under the streetlight. His posture was relaxed, almost too relaxed, and it made the officers uneasy. Most people in his situation would be nervous, defensive, maybe even trembling. But this man's steady eyes and measured breathing made him seem like he was the one in control, even though he was surrounded. The taller officer shoved him lightly against the hood, spreading his arms as if preparing for a search. "You planning on telling us what you're really doing here?" he muttered. The man didn't flinch. "Just passing through," he said evenly. The shorter cop circled around to the driver's side, peeking into the car with his flashlight. "Clean ride," he said mockingly. "Almost too clean. You trying to hide something from us?" Silence hung in the air for a moment. The man stood still, eyes fixed forward, giving away nothing. His calmness was like a wall they couldn't break through, and it frustrated them more with every passing second. The taller cop leaned closer, his voice dropping into a low growl. "See, guys like you think you're slick. But you don't fool us. We know when someone's up to no good." The driver finally turned his head slightly, his eyes sharp, almost amused. "Do you?" he asked softly. For the first time the officers hesitated. Something about his tone unsettled them. It wasn't fear, it wasn't defiance, it was something different. It was confidence. A kind of confidence that didn't make sense for someone pulled over and shoved against a car in the middle of the night. The taller cop clenched his jaw, trying to reassert control. "We'll see about that. You better hope you're clean, because if not, tonight's gonna get real bad for you." But the man only smiled faintly, his voice calm and steady. "Careful, officer. Sometimes the people you think you're intimidating aren't the ones you should be worried about." The street was quiet again except for the sound of crickets in the grass, but in that silence, a shift had happened. The officers thought they were in charge, but without realizing it, they had just stepped into something much bigger than themselves. The cool night air carried a faint chill as the two officers tightened their grip on the situation. They had the man pressed against the hood of his car, but the strange calmness in his voice still bothered them. Most people would be sweating, panicking, maybe begging to be let go. But this man stood steady, as though he had nothing to fear. The taller cop, feeling his authority slipping, decided to push harder. He yanked the man's arm roughly, pretending to check his pockets while whispering in a harsh tone, "You think this is a game? You're not fooling us. We know what you're up to." The man's lips curved into a faint smile that the officer couldn't see. His voice came out low and collected, almost as if he were lecturing a student. "What exactly am I up to, officer?" The shorter cop laughed, circling back toward the front of the car. "Oh, don't play dumb. Guys like you, driving through town in fancy black cars, acting like you don't belong. People like you always have something to hide." He tapped the car's hood with his flashlight for emphasis, as if each tap was proof of his point. The driver shifted his weight slightly but didn't resist. His eyes followed the officer with quiet intensity. "Is that so?" he said softly. The words weren't aggressive, but there was something about his tone that unnerved both men. Not wanting to lose face, the taller officer shoved him again, harder this time, pressing his chest against the cold metal of the car. "Don't get smart with me. We can make this night very long for you. So why don't you start telling us the truth?" The driver inhaled slowly, the sound calm and measured. "The truth?" He gave a small shake of his head. "Funny how often people demand the truth when they're not ready to hear it." The taller cop clenched his teeth. He hated being spoken to like that, like he wasn't the one in charge. His partner stepped closer, shining the flashlight directly into the man's eyes. "Where you coming from? Where you meeting? Drugs? Guns? Or maybe you're running from something bigger? Tell us before we find out ourselves." The driver blinked against the light, unbothered, and answered in a steady tone. "Passing through. That's all." The answer was too simple, too clean, and the cops didn't buy it. They wanted fear, they wanted excuses, they wanted something they could hold over him. But instead, they got a calm confidence that seemed impossible in this situation. It only made them push harder. The taller officer yanked open the car door, rifling through the glove box again even though the driver had already given him his documents. The shorter one moved to the back seat, shining his light into every corner. Nothing. No drugs, no weapons, not even trash. The car was spotless. Too spotless. "This doesn't make sense," the shorter cop muttered. "Nobody keeps a car this clean unless they're hiding something." The driver finally turned his head, his eyes sharp and unflinching. "Or maybe I just take care of what's mine." The taller cop slammed the glove compartment shut in frustration. "You think you're slick, don't you? Acting all calm like you've got nothing to hide. But I see through you." He jabbed a finger at the man's chest. "You're trouble. And I don't care how long it takes, I'll find out what your game is." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. The man stood still, the faintest hint of a smile returning to his lips. His calmness felt almost like defiance, but not in a reckless way, in a way that carried quiet power. He looked the taller officer directly in the eye and said slowly, "Be very careful with assumptions. They can cost you more than you think." The shorter cop scoffed, trying to break the tension. "You hear this guy? Talking in riddles like he's some kind of philosopher. Just another smooth talker. I say we haul him in, let him sweat it out overnight." The taller cop nodded, clearly tempted. But deep down, something about the man's confidence gnawed at him. It wasn't the arrogance of a criminal caught red-handed. It wasn't the panic of someone hiding a secret. It was something else, something he couldn't place. Still he refused to back down. "Last chance," the officer growled, his face inches from the man's. "Tell me who you really are, or tonight ends badly for you." The man didn't flinch, didn't look away. His voice was calm, almost unnervingly steady. "Who I am, is the last thing you want to know." For the first time, both officers felt a flicker of unease. They exchanged quick glances, neither wanting to admit it out loud, but both sensing it. Something was wrong. Something about this man didn't fit the story they had built in their heads. Yet their pride wouldn't let them stop. So they pressed on, convinced they were closing in on the truth, unaware that in reality they were walking straight into a mistake they would never forget. The night had grown colder, the wind brushing gently through the trees, but the tension between the man and the two officers was hotter than ever. The driver stood calmly by his car, his posture unshaken, while the officers searched and interrogated him with growing impatience. They wanted him rattled, they wanted him desperate, but he refused to give them the satisfaction. His silence wasn't weakness, it was control. And control was the one thing they couldn't take from him. The taller officer finally decided he'd had enough. He grabbed the man's wallet again, flipping it open roughly under the beam of his flashlight. He skimmed past the license and credit cards looking for anything out of place. Then his eyes froze. Tucked neatly behind the license in a slot most people wouldn't notice, was a badge. A very specific badge. He pulled it out with a mocking grin. Well, what do we have here? The shorter cop leaned closer, laughing under his breath. Don't tell me this guy thinks he's some kind of secret agent. He snatched the badge, holding it up to the light. The letters stared back at him in bold, unmistakable print. FBI. For a split second, the laughter died in his throat. His smile faltered as he studied it more carefully. Looked real. Too real. The weight of the metal, the fine detail, the seal. It wasn't some cheap toy. He glanced nervously at his partner, but the taller cop only smirked, trying to cover his own doubt. Fake, he said with forced confidence. Has to be fake. No way someone like him is FBI. The driver finally broke his silence. His voice was low but carried a commanding strength that made both officers pause. You've just interfered with a federal investigation. The words hung in the air like thunder. For the first time that night, the officers didn't know what to say. The taller one forced a chuckle, but his laugh was shaky. Nice try. That's a good story. But if you're really FBI, then where's your backup? Where's your fancy car? Where's your suit and tie? The man's eyes locked on his, unwavering. You've watched too many movies, he replied calmly. We don't all walk around in suits. Some of us work quietly. Some of us work where no one notices, until it's too late. The shorter cop shifted uncomfortably, his grip tightening on the badge. Something about the man's tone didn't feel like bluffing. It felt like truth. He suddenly remembered the spotless car, the calm demeanor, the way the man never once broke under pressure. Normal suspects cracked under questioning. But this man had been steady from the very beginning, like he had nothing to hide, because he didn't. The taller officer, refusing to back down, jabbed a finger at him. You expect us to believe that? You think just flashing some badge is gonna scare us? No. You're not FBI. You're a faker trying to act tough. But the driver's response cut through the bravado like a knife. Then call it in. Run the badge number. Run my name. Go ahead. I'll wait. The two officers looked at each other, hesitation creeping in. If it was fake, calling it in would expose him. But if it was real, then they had just made the worst mistake of their careers. Their arrogance had led them to push around a federal agent in the middle of his operation. And the consequences of that mistake could be devastating. The shorter cop swallowed hard, lowering his flashlight slightly. His partner still tried to hold his ground, but his voice had lost its edge. Even if you are FBI, you should have identified yourself earlier. You can't just. Wrong, the man interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I don't have to identify myself until I choose to. And you've chosen the worst possible way to find out. The silence that followed was deafening. Crickets chirped in the grass. The wind rustled through the leaves. But neither officer moved. Both of them were now painfully aware that the ground beneath their feet had shifted. They weren't in control anymore. The driver took a slow step forward, reclaiming his badge from the shorter cop's trembling hand. He tucked it back into his wallet, then slipped the wallet into his pocket with the same calm patience he had shown all night. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. Here's what happens next, he said evenly, his eyes steady on both of them. You either walk away right now or you dig this hole deeper. I suggest you think very carefully before you decide. For the first time since the stop began, the two officers felt something they hadn't expected to feel: fear. Not the fear of physical harm, but the fear of what they had stepped into. A world far bigger than them. A man far more powerful than they imagined. And in that moment, both of them began to realize, they weren't intimidating him. He was warning them. The night felt heavier now, as if the very air had shifted around them. The flashing lights from the patrol car still painted the road in streaks of red and blue, but instead of looking powerful, they now felt like warning signals screaming into the darkness. The two officers stood frozen, their bravado slipping away piece by piece as the man before them calmly adjusted his jacket, slid his badge back into his pocket, and straightened up with quiet authority. It was no longer just a traffic stop. It was something far bigger, and they both knew it. The taller officer tried to swallow the lump in his throat, forcing his voice to stay steady. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. But you can't just walk around pretending to be FBI and expect us to. The man cut him off with a sharp glance. His eyes were cold, piercing, and the taller cop's words withered instantly. I don't pretend, the man said firmly. I operate. And tonight you've interfered. The shorter officer stepped back, his palms damp with sweat. He had been the first to laugh at the badge, the first to mock, but now he was the first to realize the danger they were truly in. His voice shook slightly as he asked, "So, what happens now?" The agent didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm tone carried more weight than any shout could. "What happens now depends on you. You pulled me over, tried to intimidate me, obstructed my work, and almost blew an operation that's been months in the making. That's not just poor judgment, that's a federal offense." The taller cop's stomach dropped. The words "federal offense" rang in his ears like a siren. He had been in the force long enough to know what that meant. Suspension, investigations, maybe even charges. His career, his pension, everything he had built could vanish overnight. He clenched his fists at his sides, but his arrogance was gone. Now he was grasping for excuses. We didn't know. You didn't say anything. You should have." The agent stepped closer, cutting off his protest. "You didn't ask. You assumed. And instead of professionalism, you chose intimidation. That was your mistake." The shorter cop lowered his gaze, unable to look the man in the eyes. His mind replayed the entire stop like a movie reel, how they had laughed, how they had pushed, how they had mocked. He remembered tapping the man's car like he owned it, shining the flashlight into his face, treating him like a suspect. And now, standing here, he realized how badly they had miscalculated. Shame mixed with fear, and he felt his chest tighten. The taller cop, still clinging to a shred of authority, tried again. "Listen, maybe we can just call this a misunderstanding. Nobody got hurt. We were just doing our job." But the agent's stare cut through the excuse. "Your job?" he repeated, his voice colder now. "Your job is to protect. To serve. Not to harass citizens because you think they don't belong. Not to abuse your badge to feed your ego. If I wasn't who I am, if I really was just passing through, how far would you have gone tonight?" The question landed like a hammer. Both officers felt it in their gut. The truth was, they didn't know the answer, and that realization was worse than anything else. The shorter cop spoke quickly, his words tumbling out. We didn't mean any harm. We just thought. Look, we were wrong, okay? We crossed the line." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear beneath. The agent studied them both for a long moment, his silence heavier than any lecture. Then he spoke with finality. "You thought wrong. And tonight, you learned the cost of arrogance." The taller cop's mouth went dry. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but there was nothing left to say. The evidence of their failure was standing right in front of them, calm and unshaken, while they trembled in the glow of their own flashing lights. Finally, the agent pulled out his phone, tapping the screen deliberately. Both officers' hearts pounded as they watched, imagining who he might be calling. Their supervisor? Internal Affairs? Another FBI team waiting nearby? Their future flashed before their eyes in fragments of hearings, demotions, and disgrace. But after a moment, the agent slipped the phone back into his pocket without dialing. He let them stew in their own fear before speaking again. "Consider this your warning. Next time you let pride control your badge, you won't be this lucky." Relief washed over the shorter cop's face, but it was mixed with humiliation. The taller cop exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. They had wanted to intimidate, but instead, they had been broken down piece by piece until nothing was left but regret. The agent walked back to his car, his movements steady and deliberate. He opened the door, paused, and glanced at them one last time. His words were quiet, but they cut deep. "Remember this night. Because I won't." With that, he slid into his car, started the engine, and drove off, leaving the two officers standing in the flashing lights of their patrol car, silent, shaken, and drowning in the weight of their own mistakes. For the first time in their careers, they realized they weren't the ones in control. And that bitter truth would haunt them far longer than the night itself. The night returned to its quiet rhythm after the agent's car disappeared down the dark stretch of road, its taillights fading into the distance. The flashing patrol lights seemed almost mocking now, as if they were shining a spotlight on the two officers' humiliation. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence was heavier than anything they had experienced on duty before. Their breaths came slow and uneven, the adrenaline draining from their bodies and leaving behind only shame. The taller cop finally broke the silence, but his voice lacked the authority it once carried. "We really messed up tonight." The words tasted bitter, but saying them out loud made the reality unavoidable. His partner didn't answer immediately. The shorter cop leaned against the hood of their cruiser, staring at the ground as though it held the answers to the mess they had created. His hands trembled slightly, the echo of fear still clinging to him. "Messed up doesn't even cover it," the shorter officer said quietly. "We pushed him. We mocked him. We treated him like a suspect when he was probably out here doing something important. What if we ruined everything? His voice cracked with guilt, and for once there was no laughter, no smug grin, just honesty. The taller cop rubbed the back of his neck, staring into the trees. His pride had been shattered. All night, he had tried to prove dominance, to remind the man who was in charge. But now he realized he had never been in control at all. "We could have blown an FBI case," he muttered. "Do you have any idea how deep we'd be buried if he reported us?" That thought sank deep into both of them. Their careers, their reputations, even their freedom, everything they had worked for could be stripped away in an instant if that agent chose to make one phone call. And the worst part was, he had every right to. The shorter officer finally looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "He didn't report us. He could have, but he didn't. You know what that means?" The taller cop frowned. "That we got lucky?" "No," his partner said firmly, shaking his head. "That means he gave us a chance. A warning. He wanted us to learn from this." The words lingered between them. For the first time, they both understood the true weight of what had happened. The agent hadn't humiliated them just to assert his power. He had given them a mirror, forcing them to see who they had become, two officers so blinded by arrogance that they forgot the duty they swore to uphold. The taller cop sighed deeply, finally letting the truth settle in. "We were supposed to protect people. And instead we acted like bullies. If that man wasn't FBI, if he was just some regular guy driving home, we'd be the villains tonight." The realization was brutal. Their badges, the symbols of their service, suddenly felt heavier than ever. They had misused them. They had treated authority as a weapon instead of a responsibility. And the shame of that truth dug deeper than any reprimand ever could. The shorter officer straightened up slowly, his voice more resolute now. "We can't undo what happened. But we can change what happens next. No more intimidation. No more acting like we're above the people we serve. We've got to do better. We have to." His partner nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right. "If we don't, next time we won't be walking away this easy." The two of them turned off the patrol car's flashing lights. The road returned to darkness, quiet and calm once more. But inside, neither of them felt calm. They carried a weight now, a lesson etched into them by a man who hadn't needed to raise his voice or throw a punch to make his point. Driving back to the station, the silence remained heavy, but this time it wasn't just shame, it was reflection. Every streetlight that passed overhead seemed like a reminder, every turn of the wheel a silent vow. By the time they pulled into the lot, both officers knew that tonight had changed them forever. They didn't need a written report or an official reprimand. The punishment was already inside them, the knowledge that they had let their pride and power lead them astray. And the gift, strangely enough, was also inside them, the second chance the agent had silently granted. For years to come, whenever they put on their uniforms and clipped their badges to their belts, they would remember the man on that quiet road, the one they had tried to intimidate, and the one who had taught them the hardest lesson of their careers without ever raising his hand. The memory of his calm voice, his steady eyes, and his final warning would follow them like a shadow. And though they would never see him again, the impact of that night would guide them for the rest of their lives. Because sometimes the strongest lessons don't come from punishments or lectures. Sometimes they come from the quiet power of someone who refuses to be broken. And on that night, two arrogant officers learned the difference between carrying a badge and truly honoring it.